first one is how have different stakeholders, directors, regulators, management responded to date to the concept of an SCR? So, Hayden, you want to just comment quickly on your experiences and then I'll touch on it as well.
Yes. I personally haven't had much interaction with regulators yet. It does seem that regulators are delivering these kind of messages with more frequency to the industry. I find that directors tend to respond more warmly than management. And I particularly find that senior management sometimes is worried about what this work might show up. And so a CEO who's been around for 5 or 10 years tends to be a bit more hesitant to do this work. But I think a brand new CEO might engage strongly with it, wanting to know what have they inherited in terms of the social condition of their company.
So one observation I'd make, I think, is that in this post-Royal Commission world, boards generally are casting around for solutions, right? So they've got very, very significant challenges, as we all know. And one of the things I think that has hit them really hard is that they've been caught by surprise. There was a gap between what they understood and what the reality was. And so in my discussions with individual directors, there's generally been a real interest in this. That doesn't necessarily mean they would embrace it and adopt it, but there's generally been a real interest in it. I don't know about the regulators. John Lonsdale, I noticed, made a mention in his speech about social risks yesterday, which is a good sign. But if I were in the shoes of ASIC in particular, I think this sort of idea could save ASIC an awful lot of work. Next question. Does a whistleblower equal a failure of scanning for social condition risks? And I guess the point being made there is that if you've got social condition risks which are not identified and managed, might that bring a whistleblower out of the woodwork? So I'm not sure about that. Hayden, have you got a view?
Yeah, I think yes. So the way that we would scan inside an organisation is we might scan up and down the hierarchy and see is there strong relational links between all the layers of the hierarchy. Where that happens, if something is going wrong at the lower levels, it will be seen that people are connected within the organisation and it will be passed up to senior management. It's also the case that culture that's trying to be set from the top would be passed down through the hierarchy to the lower levels. And we would scan horizontally across business units or functions. And where something is going wrong, which would lead to a whistleblower, you'd usually find that it's in an isolated pocket of the business that's not well connected to others. And so I would say that if you were scanning your social condition within the company, you would hope to pick up most of those problems and avoid the need for a whistleblower.
The next question is, what's the global experience for this sort of concept? And I don't know that there is real global experience, but I can tell you, just based on LinkedIn people reading the posts that have been put up and conversations. I was in the UK just a couple of days ago talking to people last week. And there's a real interest in these sorts of ideas when we engage in the conversation. So they have the same sort of issues in, say, the UK as we have here. And in theory, at least, the SCR concept would help them as well.
So, I've just one thought on that as well. So integrated reporting has been around, I think, since 2013. And all the listed companies in South Africa have to do an integrated report once a year and report on their 6 capitals, one of which is social and relationship capital. So that has led to quite a lot of practice in South Africa around understanding relationships and social capital. And it's starting to filter around the world. So in the UK, one of the regulators is encouraging the use of integrated reporting. There's hundreds of companies in India and Japan, for example, now doing integrated reporting. There's been less than 10, I think, in Australia. So it's a sort of related area, and we're lagging a bit behind.
So integrated reporting picks up a whole range of different capital: social capital, human capital, intellectual capital, and so on, not just financial capital. There's a question there, how does an SCR relate to a sustainability report? And I guess there is some overlap. But I think one of the main differences here is that to do this social condition report really well, you would need a thorough and deep knowledge of the business. So this is not about sort of dealing with the environment, for example, and the impact that the company has on the environment necessarily, but it's about the impact on relationships in particular and social risks on ultimately on the performance of the business. Is there anything you'd like to say on that, Hayden? No? Okay. There's a question there, should super fund trustees demand FCRs and SCRs? And I think legitimately you can ask the question about banks as well. And the issue of FCRs for banks has been around for a while. And there have been speeches made by people at APRA who have suggested it might be worth pursuing some years ago. So you could easily see how over time the benefits that have flowed from FCRs and hopefully from SCRs could flow across to other types of organisations. Okay, thank you. Yes, so you could easily see that happening, and it's worth noting too that when FCRs were first introduced, there was a real pushback from industry against the whole idea, particularly from boards and others. But I know from my own experience at APRA, if you go and ask people on boards of insurance companies about FCRs, they value them enormously and typically will say that they're the most valuable document that they get all year. Personally, I can easily see the concept of an SCR gaining the same sort of credibility. How reliable are the metrics in your experience? Are these measures open to manipulation? That's a really interesting question when you're talking about signal analysis. That's the electronic analysis of different matters, as I touched on, very much touched on. The whole idea about that particular concept, though, is that it gives honest signals, not what you would like to present, but what you are doing almost subconsciously. Big question, which requires a much bigger answer than the one that I've just given to you. And so that's really the last question. So I think we've just about run out of time. I've got a message here. We've got 1 minute to go. Are there any last minute questions from anybody in the audience or comments? Rowan, yeah.
Just a quick one,
Yeah.
Ian. I mean, just in the vein of that last question, how a lot of these relationship analyses, how much are they subject to groupthink at the time? I mean, so they might be, how predictive are they in the sense that, you know, they actually give you a measure at a point in time? And how subject to change are they when societal views come out in the open?
Yeah, so Rowan's onto a really good point here. And we all know that society is changing at an incredibly fast pace. And that's partly a function of technology. It's a function of changing attitudes and so on. My favourite example here is mental health for disability insurance. You know, mental health almost was not on the radar about 20 years ago for disability income business. And it's now number one or number two source of claims for quite a few insurers in the marketplace. And where did that come from? How did that happen? If you go and talk to the experts, they'll say actually the underlying rate of true mental health really hasn't changed much. But what has changed is attitudes to mental health and people's willingness to talk about having mental health problems, the willingness to take time off work and so on and so forth. Now, so the point that Rowan's making is that has changed really, really quickly. And how do you pick that up? And one way of doing that is by looking for predictive signals. So the signal analysis that I was talking about, if you pick up a change in tone and commentary on mental health, for example, it could be in Twitter, it could be on Facebook, it could be anywhere out there in social media, you would get some predictive indicator of how attitudes are changing. But you really need to monitor consistently and continuously. Yes?
Elaine Collins. I just had a question around whether the social condition can be incorporated into a financial condition report, because I think it was almost like non-operational risks become financial risks in the end. Social risks become financial risks in the end.
Yes.
Is there any thought around that, or is that then becoming too unwieldy?
No, it's an interesting point. And I think you could readily incorporate social condition issues in the financial condition report, my worry there would be that it would be subsumed by the financial stuff, right? So that people will naturally gravitate towards the financial stuff. And the other thing is it's very insurance focused and it's very actuary focused. One of the issues about social condition generally and social condition reports, I think, is that it would be a poor outcome if social condition reports were seen as purely the domain of actuaries in insurance. It's a much, much bigger issue than that.